Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this Lifelink Workwell webinar, Breaking the Silence, Supporting Men's Mental Health at Work. We're going to forgo the traditional awkward opening bit where we wait to make sure that everyone has joined us. I can see that our panelists have all arrived, so we'll go through introductions for them, and some of the people in our audience can continue to join us. Firstly, thanks for our panelists for joining us today. Take some time out during your lunch to talk to us, to share your expertise. We have Paul Blackwood, the Training and Development Lead at Lifelink Workwell, David Barrow, physiotherapist and health tech entrepreneur at Rehab Guru, and Rich Tildesley, outdoor practice and development manager, as well as an outdoor therapist at Venture Trust. Just a little bit of housekeeping for our audience. We're in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions, thoughts, things you want to share with us, just use the text box and we'll pick them up towards the end. I'm going to hand over to the members of our panel for a short introduction from each of them. You just maybe take a minute or less, introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background, current role, your previous experiences in the field. So Paul, if we could start with you, please.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ryan there. So hi, my name is Paul Blackwood. So as Ryan had said, I am the training development lead here at Lifelink Workwell. And my past experience, so I have 23 years experience in both people management and training and development within the private sector. Throughout that time, certainly I've seen many sort of changes, both positive and negative, in the approaches to mental health in the workplace. But this is where my sort of interest in the workplace mental health really began. I had a slight change of path in 2020, just on the back of COVID, where I'd embarked on a role as an assessor and wellbeing mentor for modern apprentices. And this role really sort of heightened my interest, if you like, in all things sort of workplace wellbeing. Of course, it came with different challenges with a different generational angle at the same time, but very interesting. But with that experience, certainly has led me here today, and with my role within Lifelink Workwell as a training development lead, where I get the great privilege really to deliver educational sessions to organisations on wellbeing and mental health. So it's a great privilege to be here today as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Paul. David, you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm David Barrow. Most of my friends call me Dave or something probably less polite. I've had the privilege of a lovely career helping people within healthcare, both physically and mentally. That started off as a degree in physio, and I soon realised that the NHS wasn't quite for me. So most of my career has been in the military, in professional sport, and I now am grateful to manage my own staff in my own company. So it's been quite an interesting journey of being a single clinician, managing clinical outputs in teams, and now having the opportunity to try and do something really good within the industry. Although I started out as a physio, that covers such a wide range of services, from working within a ward, one-on-one appointments where you only see someone for half an hour, and then within the military where you can be completely embedded within the entire community, living on base. So I've had a really wide range of different experiences within organisations, touching them, that's given me a really nice round flavour of how things can be done very well. And really glad to join you here and hopefully contribute something positive.
Lovely. Thanks for that. And finally, Rich, last but not least, do you want to give us your short intro?
Hi everyone, I'm Rich, also known as Tilly. I work with Venture Trust, a third sector sort of charity that works in the criminal justice system. Yeah, my background, I grew up in working class communities in the Northwest Midlands, like in Stoke-on-Trent, in a sort of mining town. So yeah, suffered with, I suppose, male socialization, and vulnerability was certainly not seen as a strength where I came from. So sort of grew up in those communities, and I've worked in the third sector now for about 20 years, mainly in the outdoors, doing wilderness expeditions, working a lot with young men, angry young men. And I realized through that, that, getting men to sort of talk about vulnerability and issues was really important. That led me into sort of psychotherapy. I'm quite a fan in that. And now I work as an outdoor psychotherapist as well. That's
awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone for introducing yourselves. We're going to move on to our first topic. There's a number of topics we're going to look to cover off today, but we'll just see how the conversation flows, see where we go naturally. I'll jump in, I'll keep us on track if there's anything like key in danger of being missed. The first thing we're going to look at is a bit of a scene setting, is the key factors contributing to the decline in men's mental health in the workplace. Paul, if you want to take us away on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, as we know, there's sort of several things that can trigger, mental health in men, and some factors would be the likes of the ones that sort of crop up in my own experiences, sort of separation, divorce, or even other relationship sort of problems, that sort of arise, including other factors that are preeminent in society in general, to be fair, is the financial stress, pressures in the workplace, things like stress over workloads, etc. And some really having a really unfulfilled working life. I would class as up there as one of the factors. Of course, sort of generalised ones like illness, isolation, becoming a father is one of the sort of bigger ones recently. And of course, we know by statistics that certainly drug and alcohol abuse is definitely higher in men as well. So they would be definitely the sort of main factors. Now, we know mental health illness affects people in every gender. The specifics, however, do sort of differ. And what I found is there's an assumption that men don't struggle with mental health simply because they're often portrayed, usually, or expected to be quite strong and quite silent individuals. And that's even within some sort of workplaces in society in general, that tends to be the norm. This, I'd say, would definitely sort of resulted in poor mental health within the sort of male, even the working population, as well as in society as well. I think many men, to be honest with you, fear that opening up and being honest about their mental health, and it almost goes against the grain that they believe what a man should be. And sadly, again, many believe, and not just men, I mean, across other genders as well, the social norm is that men don't really talk about their feelings and emotions. So certainly those would be, in my mind, the sort of key factors that would contribute to the decline in men's mental health.
I mean, it's certainly something growing up in the west of Scotland I can recognise, that kind of stoic sort of not what it's expected of a man to talk about mental
Yeah.
health. I'm assuming, Rich, as you talked about your background earlier, that's something that you would definitely find as being in your experience true as well.
Yeah, huge. I think there's changing gender roles a massive part of it. Lack of I remember when I was growing up going into working men's clubs, and just sitting there, and it was like just men sitting in silence together, with cost of living crisis and the shutting of sort of community sort of spaces like that. It's having a huge impact on men just sitting together.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, right, sometimes to get the conversation flowing with guys together. I know there's, things like men's sheds and different sort of
Mhm.
opportunities out there. David, is it something that, you think you would come across as in your work and your experience, something that you've struggled with getting guys to open up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very niche, closed environment, the military. And I'd say I've really only been stepping into that in the last 10 years because in traditional healthcare, mental health is often seen or was traditionally seen as different from physical health. The idea that emotional and social problems can manifest in physical illness through stress or um, other means has only really been well documented in the last 10 years. And actually, in the military, it was really Afghan and Iraq that brought up the topics that we're talking about, because previously pain was just weakness leaving the body, and if you were a bit of a jellyhead, then you just needed to go off because you weren't fit for service. But actually, with so many people deploying to Afghan and Iraq, and conversations between the lads or with them and their healthcare professional, there's just been this awareness that actually everyone became affected by that. That it's completely normal to talk about it. Now, people might go to their padre in their regiment, they might go to their doctor, they might go to their, someone, or they might just go to a friend. Traditionally, all squaddies, young squaddies, would have lived in a room of maybe 4 to 6 people. So there would be a natural amount of debriefing or moaning or whatever you would traditionally call it, that would help people to get over the loss of someone, just come off for foot patrol, lost 2 of their lads, and the padres and the people embedded within that unit would sort of help people. But now, where you see people going back to the block and they're in a single room on their own, or maybe they live out with their wife and their children, actually sometimes they don't have that. And what we see is domestic violence, we see suicide, we see all sorts of stuff, because people aren't getting as much access to it. and people in the military have just had to wake up that this is something that we need to look at. So I guess that's something in the last 10 years I've been working with. And so that's sort of our background to it, because it is a very young population. I've not had that exposure like Rich has had with an older population, because generally people retire before they're 40.
I mean, what we're talking about there essentially is this stigma, right? That's attached to men's mental health, and whether there's a generational gap. Well, we're going to come on to that later, I think. But I just wanted to open up to the panel. If someone wants to take the lead on this, how do we break down that stigma? How do we tackle the barriers to openness that we're talking about here in men's mental health?
I think for myself, certainly, I mean, I think the good news is that there is definitely ways to break stigma, without a doubt, across all areas, and certainly in the workplace as well. One of the priorities definitely would be creating awareness, and it's got to be something that's spoken about and regularly, so that it becomes the new normal. When that sort of happens, I believe, men will see that it's actually okay to open up about how they feel, and actually have those feelings validated, as well. Certainly, one of the sort of key factors I would say to that is it's having that non-judgmental approach, and having that non-judgmental environment, as well, where men do feel comfortable discussing mental health. And equally, our managers, our leaders out there as well, can definitely lead by example, by sharing their own experiences, and encouraging others to sort of talk about their mental health as well. Certainly from past experience, I would say, in all organisations, there's one-to-one conversations that are happening, but sometimes mental health and wellbeing doesn't form part of that one-to-one conversation, and really it should be spoken about with the same importance as this, say, like productivity, for example, as well. But including these sort of conversations will definitely sort of build those trusts, which are really, really needed, and you'll actually naturally break down the stigma, I believe, that does surround sort of men's mental health, as well. But definitely the awareness is the key in my mind of sort of breaking that stigma, as well. Certainly, in organisations, organising things like training, workshops, education, all that sort of stuff, talking about signs, talking about the symptoms, and it's really just getting that knowledge out there. We've said it before, knowledge leads, knowledge is power. And just having that information, there, I think is really, really important, as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a piece in there around awareness. I think there's something around cultural change in that as well. And really dealing with the isolation of a lot of men. I think young boys are picked up and nurtured and told and cuddled, and then get to a certain age and we're told boys don't cry.
Sure.
So there's that point where we're then isolated, and then we form these bands of brothers, these sort of communities where vulnerability, we're frightened of it. So we project everything that we're frightened of, i.e. care, tenderness. We project that out onto other groups, and form this collective sort of language of banter. So we hold that as men. And then as soon as we're drunk, as soon as drinking gets involved, those sort of guardians of the unconscious stand, then we're hugging each other, kissing each other. All that tenderness comes in. We're not even interested in the opposite sex until the end of the night, when we have to prove our manhood again. So there's that sort of real cultural change, and I think you mentioned power in there. There's a powerlessness in there. So it's how do we empower men? How do we help men to realize that vulnerability is powerful? There's strength in vulnerability. And not just in getting rage and screaming and shouting and using your fists. It's a difficult task.
I think a
Yeah,
lot
for
of
sure.
it comes down to leadership as well. If someone's in a position of responsibility, are they prepared to show that? That might be in the military, the commanding officer, it might be a CEO, it might be the sergeant majors, or people that are sort of middle managers. Now, if you go back, to the Falklands War, I'm sorry to talk about the military, but that's my experience. Very few people committed suicide during the Falklands, but many did afterwards. And because so many people retired at a younger age, the military never really had to deal with people committing suicide in the block, in their accommodation, at their home, in married quarters. But it's happening now. and it's been happening for the last 5 or 10 years. And it's made people have to wake up, because if you're in a position of command, your performance, your promotions are tied to how well your soldiers perform. Not only are they deployable, are they alive, are they healthy? And these sort of KPIs are really, really important. It's not just about money, because the military doesn't do what they do, the NHS doesn't do what they do to make money. They do it because they are they have a certain output that they have to reach. So where people are now demonstrating, symptoms that they are struggling, what we're actually seeing is commanding officers and sergeant majors taking time off. They are going man down and actually showing that it doesn't matter if you're a trooper, a private, or whether you're the CEO, you all need to have time out. And if you're struggling, then you just do it. And that then gives permission for other people too. So if people at the top aren't prepared to put their hand up and say, I'm struggling a little bit, how can anyone in the organization be made to feel comfortable that they can do the same?
I guess that's something that, you can talk about from the sort of military background, but you can also bring into sort of any sort of workplace, any organizational structure where people at the top are needing to sort of give that example, act as somewhat like a mentor for the people who are involved at a slightly lower level or through like a chain of command or a management structure.
Which I think is difficult, because if people are chasing promotions, which in a civvy world often looks like big pay increases, a better quality of life, actually people might feel compelled to just push on, and that they can't show a sign of weakness because someone else might get promoted above them. And I think we can all suffer with that. But actually, if we see it as a sign of strength, and actually you end up looking after your team as a knock-on effect, that they feel that they can do the same. I guess it depends what core values the company has. And there's a great TEDx video that you've probably all seen, because you're all immersed in this world, by Bob Keeler, and he talks about the core values of a company and whether they actually walk and talk it, or whether they just talk it themselves. And actually, if you let go of profit and actually you prioritize the people who you spend 70% of your life with, which is the man to the right or left of you, or the woman to the right or left of you, then actually, what is wealth? It might be that you're super happy in your job. If you're a manager, all of your staff, stay with you because they don't want to leave all the time. You're not having to constantly recruit, because you as a work family are happy, and you then leave having more time and more energy for the people that you really love. So I think it's about redefining what is wealth, and what you actually want out of life. And if you're prepared to live your life aligned with those values, or just worry about money, which in a cost of living crisis is actually quite difficult, because if betraying your values means that you put food on the table, then someone's in a really difficult situation, and that dissonance can drive all sorts of problems.
Yeah, I mean, you're sort of maybe back in that scenario that we're talking about, where a man is in a position to put on a sort of front where he's going for that survival situation, and something inside is maybe not, right, but he's covering that up in order to move forward with what he sees as putting food on the table, kind of thing. I think it's really interesting, the parallels between the military world and, was it civvies? Was that the term you used?
Yeah.
The sort of more like our world that we exist in, with the workplaces and things like that. Another sort of big variable in the approach, and something we touched on, earlier, is this generation gap, between older and younger members of an organization, whatever that organization sort of shape is. I mean, how do you guys personalize your approach to mental health whenever you're based on a generational difference you might face? Does someone want to jump in and talk about the
Good
gen?
question. I think listening's obviously the key, but yeah, I wonder about if there is a massive different approach. Powerlessness is powerlessness, stigma is stigma. I suppose the way in which we'd engage one would be a little bit different. You might want to be a bit more stereotypically energetic with younger men, a bit more static and group focus, sitting with older men. Yeah, it's a
Is
tricky
it
one.
something that you recognize? Is it something that you see a generation gap? Is it you know, we think that maybe a younger generation is perhaps moving towards a more expressive place, but you know, is that being borne out with what you can see in the day to day?
Yeah, it's difficult. I'll come back to me on that one. I was gonna.
I think, sorry, I'll just jump into this one. Having sort of experience with sort of different generations, sort of in the workplace, etc. I think just on that, Ryan, the sort of younger ones, or we would class them Generation Z, I think they are actually. I hate using these terminologies, but they're there anyway. But our Generation Z was sort of the group that I was working with, certainly with the apprentices, and their mindset and to work and mental health was completely different to what I would say is an older generation. They tended to be a lot more, or wanted to be a lot more included. They were a lot more open and honest with their discussions. And they really appreciated those sort of check-ins, those regular one-to-ones, etc. Opposed to the older ones, didn't really see it as a thing because it was not the done thing, I guess, in a lot of places as well. But if we're going for the younger generation, certainly in workplaces, they can make make great use of mentors as well within the sort of workplace, and they can really bring quite a lot. It's also sort of rewinding back to myself. I'm classed as one of the millennials, born in the sort of 80s to mid 90s. And I would say we were the sort of first generation to be exposed to things like the internet and technologies, and including social media for that matter. But I think sometimes in certain organisations, from my experience, is they're underutilised a lot, because they were we were the pioneers, if you like, who were quite happy to talk about having a therapist or a counselling session, etc. And that that sort of generation is great in workplaces in terms of becoming ambassadors or mental health ambassadors. And the great thing about that is they can sort of teach the older generation new things, which is great. And sort of, again, it goes back to sort of stigma, breaking down the stigma that our older generations are not used to talking about their mental health and feelings, etc. So I think I think different generations can really work together actually, in order to sort of break down stigmas, and really sort of personalised approaches, I guess, across the generations. I think we sometimes forget in organisations, and we all do, to be honest with you, is that we're probably working with 4 different generations in the workforce. And that's quite a lot to manage, as well for many organisations, across the board sort of thing. So it's just remembering that, not one size will fit all. If we were going down that approach, then it will be quite unsuccessful. Certainly our older generations, I think personally, from experience, getting them to open up and talk about mental health will be quite alien to them. But actually promoting things like the counselling services, if it's there, training, education, I keep harking on about it because it definitely works. And talking about, specific topics around wellbeing, like stress management, building resilience, coping with change, because that's a generation that's having to cope with that as well. And sort of thinking about the sort of middle generation, or the Generation X, they're very similar to the sort of baby boomers, if you like, from the 40s and 60s, who are still in the are active still in the workforce. They're sort of kind of similar as well, because again, there's a lot of barriers to talking about mental health, and it's like an inherited behaviour, if you like, where if you look at the sort of blueprint, the fathers and the grandfathers of these generations, they didn't speak about mental health. It wasn't the done thing. So it's sort of trying to change that. I think that the sort of biggest challenge, but it's there. And as I say, I think tapping into the sort of younger generations, those millennials and Gen Z, we can learn quite a lot from, and really embrace their approach to mental health as well.
I think for men, it's very difficult to open up. And I think of all the people I know that have opened up, it's normally started with some sort of anger.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because the anger is one of the emotions that is so difficult to suppress. But it nonetheless, children that really need love can ask for it in some of the most unloving
Yeah.
ways. And if
Is
they
it
don't
maybe one of
feel
the more
that they
acceptable
can,
things, David? Do you think,
sorry,
just
say
for
that again.
guys, is it maybe one of the more acceptable things for guys? As an emotion, anger is kind of almost more accepted.
Maybe, but then at the same time, if they're chastised for being angry and they're told, you're not allowed to do that, how do they then ever get to the emotions that are beneath that?
Mhm.
And environments where people can be angry. I grew up where I grew up in North and East London, some affluent parts, some very poor parts. It was quite normal for people to go to boxing, to judo, go to clubs and expressing yourself in an angry way with older men who had been there. They'd felt frustrated, they felt angry with life. And it was perfectly okay for you to swing your arms at a punch bag and get all your anger out because they knew that. But there were some of those great men that could put an arm around you and allow you to start letting some of the other emotions out. If we don't allow men to, and young men or older men, to express all their emotions in a safe way where they're not going to hurt anyone else, um, and they're not going to be shamed for it, then they might start releasing some of the other emotions as well. And I don't think we have culturally the same sort of social networks because Rich rightly pointed out that a lot of the old social clubs were full of a lot of men being silent. So how do we recreate some of those social organizations within our culture now and somehow do that safely? um, there are some people that are doing it, and there are men's groups that are great, but men can't turn up to those working groups and feel like they've just got to open their heart if they're not allowed to get the anger out as well. And I think that's difficult because not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone feels comfortable with a man that might be angry in front of them. That can feel confronting. So for an organization, if you do have people that need to let that anger out, do they have people that they employ or that they can signpost you to where it's okay to be angry? I'm happy if someone's angry in front of me. It doesn't really bother me. So I'm happy to work with someone and work through all their emotions. But there are many people that are not. And finding that right person can be quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can see, why it might be difficult to deal with that from the point of view of like a practitioner, a counselor, something like that. If someone is angry, but as you say, maybe that's just the first emotion, and then there's something underneath. Rich, is that something that you find in your day to day? There's tools or things you can employ that you can sort of help people get to those emotions that they have underneath.
Yeah, just I keep saying listening, but anger is a secondary emotion. There's always something, and I think as David was saying, it's one of the emotions that men can feel. Anger's all right. We're allowed to feel that to a degree, as long as, well, I think traditionally we were. I think as society's changing now, as David pointed out, that's now becoming something that, oh, don't be angry. So men are now bottling that up as well. So they're like hand grenades, basically. It's all kept in there. So it's creating a what we call obviously a safe enough space for men to just let that off gently, in whatever way that might be. Um, for me, if they've engaged into a counselling relationship, if they're actually turning up, there's some other way there. But there's a lot of work to be done to get men there. And to go back a question, the older sort of, a lot of the older clients that I've worked with say they wish they'd spoken about things earlier. They've held that in for so long. So that's that peer piece that Paul was talking about. You've got these younger men, this who are a little bit more impressionable, maybe. And there's some very positive role models out there, but let's not forget there's also some negative role models out there. And when we're feeling, um, frustrated with life or disempowered, we've got the Tommy Robinsons who will step in. And we've seen where that leads just recently in the news. So yeah, it's complex. There wouldn't be an issue if it wasn't.
I mean, we've already talked about some of them, practical steps, but to bring this back to the workplace, and employers, is there any practical steps that you would identify that employers can take to support either managers, employees, or just indeed both?
I think with organisations, I mentioned the Bob Keeler TEDx talk, which is really good about walking your talk, and a company saying that we're going to treat you well with their 3-word slogan. if they actually stick to that and their staff see that they walk their talk, then it's worth them raising issues. If a company is all about community, about trust, and about honesty, and their staff don't see that in their behavior, why would they ever feel comfortable expressing their views, either feedback about the way the company is being run, about the culture within the company? Because if they don't see honesty and loyalty coming back to them, they're not gonna make themselves vulnerable. So if a company can walk their talk and their behavior is aligned with their core values, then people will naturally be more open to that. So I think that's really, really important. And then beyond that, does the company have people that are relatable? When I went through some troubles, my first experience with mental health problems was a centre where there were all wounded soldiers from Afghan and Iraq would come back, and you'd walk into the gym, it would be like Dawn of the Dead, 300 people with half their head missing, limbs missing, burns victims, and that was every day for 4 or 5 years. Now, when I was there in my first year, I was told we were all going to get counselling, and then they said, sorry, there's no money for it. So we will support you, but actually we won't. And, who did I go to for support? Well, the first people I went to, just I couldn't relate to them. And so if you've got young men within a company, and they maybe, you might not know whether they're a bit more of a man's man, what kind of people do they open to? If you've got, and other people have mentioned it, like mentors, people that have been there, done it, that are relatable. It's okay to feel angry as a man, because we often don't feel that we can be angry in front of women, in front of children, but we can be angry in front of other men. Everyone's different. That might not be the case for everybody, but making sure you do have role models that are relatable. If there's a woman that has been through abuse, she might not feel safe opening up to another man. And so I think that's really, really important to make sure that you're matching people up.
Paul, is it something? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it definitely comes down to the environment. I mean, if an environment's quite supportive, and that's the norm, or the built in to that organization, then it's a great place, certainly to sort of start, for sure. I think what sometimes gets forgotten about in a lot of organizations is they don't really get a lot of people involved. It tends to be decisions made quite high up, but actually it's the ones that that are management jobs, or whatever sort of level you want to look at it, and it's really getting them involved in the process. Certainly if it's an organization who's maybe just sort of starting out with sort of mental health initiatives, etc., it's getting the staff voice that really matters here, and what are their views and what are their ideas, that they want to implement within that organization, as well. I think another area that sort of gets a little bit forced, if you like, is people trying to understand someone's feelings, etc. But really, all it's really needed is validating, or validating a person's sort of feelings, etc. Unless you've been in that person's shoes, you wouldn't really understand, to be fair. But having that validation, that acknowledgement, can definitely go quite a long way. That listening ear is really, really important. I know I touched on it earlier, but forming, no judgment of what's actually been said, but really coming back, or, whoever they're speaking to, with that level of sensitivity and support is really, really neat. But in sort of thinking about the sort of steps that managers can take, I definitely feel that respect and confidentiality are really key here, to be honest with you. And if someone's not wishing to share, which we've sort of spoke about, with some generations are not easy to talk to, etc., if they're not ready to tell it at that moment, that should be treated as okay and should be respected, and nothing should be forced, as well. If a person knows that they can seek validation and have that safe space within a sort of workplace, over time, without a doubt, they will actually start to feel quite comfortable to share, because it becomes that cultural norm within that organisation, as well. And I think just my sort of final little bit that sort of came to my head as well. I know certainly if I was in the market of looking for new employment, which thankfully I'm not, the first thing that definitely would be coming to my head, it would be to be asking an organisation, what is your mental health policy? What programmes do you have in place? And I'm sure all organisations really want to be able to promote and say, well, we do have X, Y, and Z, because for many years and many experiences, a lot of organisations don't actually have that much in place. Things are changing, thankfully, and it is going in the right direction, but there's a lot more things that can be done for sure. But for me, certainly, I would be getting those staff involved. Let's find out their views. Let's find out what they really want within their organisation.
Yeah, I think for me, just organisationally, I think there's an importance in line management, in that awareness piece. So line managers are aware of the signs of poor mental health in men, you know, and sort of in the one-to-one procedures, questions around mental health, not just on targets. And then obviously CPD and things like active listening skills and basic counselling skills, not like full-on postgraduate diplomas, but just basic counselling skills. So line managers have got a little bit of an idea of doing what Paul was saying and just validating and just really being there to hold and contain.
Well, thank you for your insights so far. We've had a number of questions come in while we've been talking through this. I'm just going to pick out as many as we can, really, that we've got just under 10 minutes left, try and tackle as many of the questions that have come in as we can. The first one here is, are you seeing any correlations between men's mental health and being more involved in childcare responsibilities? So I guess open to the panel, whether that's positive or negative. Are we seeing a link there or changes there?
I think so. There's some great books that some of you may have read, like Fire in the Belly, like Backbone, and it's how we were raised as children, you know, depending on our generation. And then the expectation within us now, as well as society, for us to be a certain kind of father that we might not have experienced growing up. And that requires certain emotional intelligence and emotional openness to create those behaviors, which if we've been brought up in an environment that says you provide, you go to work, and that might not be said explicitly, but it's sort of said by proxy, simply by observing the behaviors of other men that were older whilst we were growing up. How do we create that openness? And as we do become vulnerable, we might start looking into ourselves and seeing some traits that we don't like. It's quite confronting to notice some of your own behaviors as a father, which I am, and then trying to be a better person and be someone that demonstrates different behaviors. I think that's quite difficult, and as a man, I do feel this need to provide, that sometimes in a workplace, in a commercial environment or a military environment or an NHS environment where you put yourself last and you put the patient first, sometimes there's just no energy and time when you get home to do that father piece. So for large organizations that have men or women, do you have a work-life balance, and do you allow a work-life balance where people finish on a Monday or a Friday with enough energy to go home and have a great life with their family so that they can wake up, come in tomorrow and be the best version of themselves?
Does anyone want to add anything more in that?
Yeah, I
Well,
think, sorry, I think this is probably a generational shift. I think fathers, or younger fathers now, do want to be, you know, they do want to be involved. They do want to be quite a big part of their children, and just exactly what we sort of said, it is about getting that work-life balance, and not, the reality is that the mother, if you like, is not the prime carer as such anymore. And it's noticing that shift as well. And I do think, from speaking to people previous, etc., those that do have a bigger impact in their child's life or their child's upbringing, if you like, them themselves, our male counterparts, you know, there is an increased happiness in their lives. It definitely improves their relationships, not both with the child but also with their partners as well. And they definitely get a more sort of satisfaction from it as well. So ultimately, I think, you know, fathers being more involved, and that sort of shift can only be seen as a positive, I'd say, for sure, both on the child and the father, and of course, a partner's relationship as well.
I think another part of it that I see a lot is fathers with no access to the children due to splits in the family and the pressures that has on their mental health.
There's a really interesting one that's coming from James here. It says, I have been recently finding out that the male community seems to open up more when they're more physically involved, whether that is a sport or just a team building activity. Would you guys agree with this? And have you seen evidence of this working from your own points of view?
Yeah, sport's a great leveler. Doesn't really matter how much money you've got, your skin color, how much you earn. You know, you're on a pitch, or you're up a mountain, or you're cycling, or you're doing something together. And I think sport or activity is a great way of lifting the lid and releasing some of the pressure, so that that feeling of talking becomes so much easier, because the first thing that comes out of your mouth is not "I'm so stressed," because you've got rid of some of that stress with activity, that you can then talk about some of the other things. I think it's hugely powerful. Even if someone's not sporty, having some other activities for people to do is really, really important, and making people feel that it's not competitive. It's literally just to engage with other people, to be active, and to enjoy the outdoors, or enjoy fresh air. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I fully agree. I work as an outdoor therapist, you know, so it's that when we process trauma, when we process, you know, emotion, when we're moving, it's moving around with us, and it's also alongside somebody instead of face to face. Is less confrontational, you know, and the exits are clear.
We'll move on to another one we have here. Is quite a general question, but how do firms get more men to come forward when they're struggling with anything? So, you know, what is like a key aspect that they can focus on if we had to say, you know, one thing they could work on tomorrow?
I would say definitely they sort of touched on it, that safe space, which a lot of places is quite new to them, to be fair. But having that space where you know the people can talk about their mental health, you know, regardless of background, etc. And really sort of our leaders out there can certainly encourage more sort of open conversations. Again, it goes back to what I was saying, you know, them using themselves as examples, and you know, showing that it is okay to actually talk as well. Obviously there'll be lots of sort of resources out there, you know, employee assistance programs, etc., online GP services, etc. as well. But I think it's about having that knowledge. It's about having that awareness of where you can, you know, if it's something that a particular leader doesn't want to deal with, they've got the signpost resources in place, and it's about them knowing, you know, where they can send people as well.
Yeah, I think having a culture of candid conversation is really, really important. There's often a no blame culture in a lot of companies, and people are told that they should feel comfortable to come forward if they see something that they don't like, or if there's feedback for the company. But actually, how is that actually received when someone does that? How open are they, and what sort of feedback do they get when they put their point of view across? Because if we start opening up, and just as a culture in a company, saying I don't like this, I don't feel comfortable with that, if there's no actual change, if the person feels that by expressing their emotions at a most basic commercial level, that those aren't being listened to, and there's no change in behavior, why would they ever talk about some of their emotions? And you know, in sport and the military, it's very different, because people are very candid. You know, if I've had a rough day, someone will say to me, "Dave, you look like a bag of shit. What is wrong with you? Like, you've just snapped at them. You're not focusing. You've got 1,000 yard stare. What is wrong?" We can have those conversations with each other in that environment, but not everyone can. And I'm not suggesting that anyone does, but an environment where you can speak to someone and say, "I've noticed you're not quite yourself," that takes a lot of trust it takes a lot of loyalty. And if the leadership of the organization does not breed trust and loyalty and openness, people just aren't going to open up.
Rich, do you have something a minute to go that you want to add there? Just
No, I think that's covered most of it. It's just having an open culture and actually listen. And I think, as David said, proving change, proving that people are listening or change occurs from whatever they bring up.
spot on. Thank you, thank you. I mean, that's our time up this afternoon. Just say thanks to our panel for joining us. Thanks to our audience, everyone joining us. We hope it's been useful for you. You found some key aspects you can take back into your own organization. Please do check us out online at lifelink.workwell.org. Follow us on LinkedIn. If you are interested in getting in touch with us for whatever reason, just answer some questions we didn't cover here, then via the website, via LinkedIn is ideal for that. Some members of our team will get in touch with you to follow up on this. We'll send out a recording of the webinar once it's finished. So we hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.